Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news, which as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. With any luck, you're having an amazing 2020 thus far, and despite the fact that it is technically still the holiday season, well, by golly gosh, news is going absolutely crazy in the tech world. I suppose, in reality, it shouldn't be so surprising. We've got CES 2020 in just a few days, and a variety of products which are waiting in the wings to either be announced or officially released. So with that said, I've decided to release two separate videos today, instead of a really ridiculously lengthy video. So this video is going to focus on AMD and Intel leaks, and then there's going to be a second video which will focus on the PlayStation 5 and a little bit of the next generation Xbox as well. With that said, despite the fact that it feels like only weeks ago that the hype for the Zen 2 processors launch went away, well, we're now waiting for Zen 3. Ryzen 3000 series feels so new, I suppose, because the 3950X is a relatively recent release, and we're still waiting for the 64-core Threadripper processors to launch. But despite all of that, there is so much hype and anticipation for Zen 3, and with any luck, CES 2020 shall provide it. The first thing I'd like to discuss is a report from China Times. I'll link the publication in the description of this video. According to their report, we will learn more details of the Zen 3 architecture and potentially some of the general plans for AMD for their upcoming products at CES 2020 from Lisa Su and her team. Although, according to this article anyway, many of the details won't be announced until the second half of 2020, which makes sense since we're only a couple of days now into 2020, and from what I'm hearing, Ryzen 4000 and its brothers will not launch until the third quarter / fourth quarter, depending on the product itself. Speaking of which, Milan will be epic, the Threadripper 4000 series will be Genesis Peak, and finally Vermeer will be the Ryzen 4000 series. And while Zen 2 has been a major success for AMD, indeed, it's been so successful that AMD themselves actually underestimated how big the demand would be. They didn't actually put a big enough order in with TSMC. This is something I covered quite recently, which is one of the reasons that higher core count processors like, let's say, the 3950X has been a little bit difficult to procure. But anyway, Zen 3 will be a major advancement for several reasons. One, we will see an increase in performance. This is due to a couple of reasons. One, it will be built on the 7nm Plus process, which will reduce power consumption by about 10%, or they could simply crank up the clock frequency for around the same power consumption. And naturally as well, it will be a denser process, so they can throw in more more transistors. And furthermore, we will see AMD really try to leverage the position they've got ahead of Intel. This is not even to do with performance in some areas, although of course performance advantage is great, but the limited supply for some of Intel's CPUs, as well as a couple of delays, has really been frustrating some of the OEM manufacturers, and this is particularly true in the server market, where we've seen, of course, delays for, let's say, Intel's Ice Lake server CPUs, and this has just been rather frustrating to companies like Dell. So obviously, while AMD continuing to show performance improvements and all that stuff is great, they also want to show that they are being relentless and continuing to support their products by continuing to advance and execute on time, which is honestly as important, if not more important in some ways, than increasing the core count, for example, in the server market. Oh, and we will also learn some details, officially anyway, of the Renoir APUs. These are probably not going to be something that will interest high-end gamers. So, for example, if you want to play AAA games with all the bells and whistles on, they probably won't be capable of that even at 1080p. But if you are wanting like a laptop which is capable of doing some productivity work or running some esports titles, Renoir may be your best bet. It will also be rather interesting as well, because It's rumoured to launch in early 2020. And Tim Apisak has actually discovered an additional series of leaks for the Ryzen 7 4800H. It's an 8-core 16-thread processor with a 2.9 GHz base clock running up to 4.3 GHz, and the physics score is just over 19,000 points. And a couple of other things while we're on the subject of AMD. For one, ycry/videocards.com has tweeted that we will see a big Navi GPU launch from AMD, although honestly, I think everyone knows that at this point. However, what's new information is he doesn't believe, according to what he's heard, that we will learn about it at CES. So potentially it's going to be a future event, which is, well, honestly frustrating. Also, a couple of folks on Twitter have said that the price of the RX 5600 cards will be over $300 in some instances. I'll get more into that in just a moment. However, as we've got some performance details, Navi 12, meanwhile, actually have some more leaks. It does feature 36 compute units, and this is where it gets very interesting because the codename itself indicates that we have Navi 12 and Navi 12 Lite. The number of WGPs which CompuBench is detecting is literally half the number of compute units, just because of the way that workgroup processors work in the Navi architecture. And GFX 1011 appears therefore to have 18 workgroup processors, 36 compute units, which means 2304 stream processors. We also have a few results as well from things such as CompuBench. And as I recently covered, Navi 12 is very similar to Navi 10, but from what we can ascertain anyway from some internal documents that have leaked, plus as well a couple of other sources have whispered, the difference is that Navi 12 does have some tweaks and allegedly can also support high bandwidth memory too. Also, while we're on the subject of various AMD products, the RX 5600M has actually had some benchmarks leaked. This is, once again, I want to stress, for the mobility sector. And basically, Rogame on Twitter has discovered a series of benchmarks which pit it against the RTX 2060. Obviously, an RTX 2060 or that type of performance tier is very popular when it comes to notebooks, laptops, whatever you want to call them. And it compares very favourably. I mean, obviously, in some areas it's a little bit slower, in some areas it's a little bit faster, but to be honest with you, there's not that much of a difference, and they also are running slightly different processors as well. The last couple of years in tech have been extremely interesting to witness, and we're actually watching Intel be on the back foot in the first time in so many years. And, of course, the Intel 9th generation processors, the 9900K, still has a couple of areas where they're stronger than AMD, admittedly not by much, let's say gaming, but in the end, it just can't compete with the higher core count Ryzen 3000 series processors such as the 3900 or the 3950X, particularly in terms of productivity. So, we all know what Intel are planning, right? Comet Lake S. And there have been a series of very interesting leaks recently, including a basically full specification sheet for the 10th generation Intel processors. But one thing we have been missing is performance data. There have been a couple of engineering sample leaks which give us a rough idea of what to expect, and additionally you can kind of do some maths yourself by saying, well, there's 2 additional processor cores and we can just crank the clock speeds up a little bit, and what do we get? But still, a very interesting leak has popped up courtesy of Tom's Hardware, which seems to be an internal official document from Intel which gives an insight into how these 10th generation CPUs will perform. I'm not going to read out all of the performance data here because, quite frankly, it would take me quite a while. However, you can see yourself that depending upon the application, the performance is either a couple of percent greater or about 30% greater. For example, Cinebench R15 running across all the processor cores is about 26% faster than the 9900K. Spec int rate based 2006 IC16, which just rolls off the tongue simply, is a 30% leap on the 10900K compared to its older predecessor, the 9900K. Whereas, if you look at something like Web XPRT, we are only looking at a 4% jump across both the tests we're seeing with Edge, which is basically negligible. I also suspect that when it comes to gaming performance, it's probably not going to be a huge leap either. What we do know, of course, regarding the 10900K is it does feature higher clock frequencies, on top of the fact it does have additional processor cores. So, for example, the single-core turbo could be 5.2 to 5.3 GHz, depending whether we're talking about turbo max 3 or velocity boost. And all of the processor cores can run up to 4.8 GHz, which is honestly nothing to sneeze at. It's quite impressive in terms of clock frequency. The thing is, though, as you can probably imagine, this means that in terms of single-threaded applications, the performance results are going to be marginal, and if you are running an application which doesn't necessarily go across a whole bunch of processor cores, i.e. gaming, if you have a decently clocked 9900K, for example, or a 9700K or whatever, honestly speaking, you're probably not going to exactly find a massive performance leap by jumping to the next generation Intel processors. However, with that said, I think that the 3900X from AMD may face some competition with certain applications. I think that AMD will have an advantage in some areas, and obviously the 3950X in terms of pure multi-threading performance still is a winner, simply because it still has 6 more cores. But I suspect in certain applications which do like higher clock frequencies, it's potentially possible that the 10900K could be a compelling option. For example, maybe for video editing. Some video editing applications don't necessarily scale well across a whole load of cores, so potentially Intel could have some niches in terms of gaming and some content creation. The problem is it's going to really come down to pricing, because honestly, if they are roughly priced at the same kind of cost, I would still recommend the 3900X in most cases, simply because you could still upgrade to the 3950X, and furthermore, you've got the option of the next generation Ryzen processors as well, and of course, this is always good to have that upgrade path. Although there are rumours that Comet Lake you can upgrade to Rocket Lake, but it's not officially confirmed. So, unless Intel do confirm this, I would always advocate the path of upgrading when possible. In the end, the 10th generation will be made or broken thanks to the price point that Intel set. The fact that they've given hyperthreading to just about every single SKU they can, other than the lowest of the low processors like the Pentiums, is a sign that Intel do want to compete in performance the best they can, but at the end of the day, 10 cores is just not enough to go against 16 cores, no matter how high they clock it with the Skylake architecture. So then, the only real recourse Intel are left with is pricing. So it's going to be fascinating to see where the chips may fall. Haha, do you get it? Pun, haha. Anyway, that was terrible. Anyway, with all of that said, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you did, then normal stuff, like, share, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.